Creative Assembly has announced another siege rework for Total War Warhammer 3. Pocket ladders are gone, gates are becoming stronger, and there are a few other changes as well. Many players hope this will finally fix sieges, but I don't think it will. Not because these changes are bad, but because they are not trying to solve the real problem. And that problem is not towers, capture points, or even the AI. The real problem is that Warhammer siege battles are built around the idea of a medieval fortress in a game that stopped being medieval a long time ago. Medieval fortifications existed for one purpose, to remove the attacker's advantages, and in such battles they did excellent job. Walls stopped cavalry from charging and maneuvering around the defenders. They also forced the attackers to go through the gates and into choke points. Narrow streets and walls reduced the value of superior numbers, so even a few defenders could hold off a larger attacking force. Buildings and walls also provided defenders with some cover from missiles. So if two medieval armies fought over a fortress, the defenders usually had a real chance even when heavily outnumbered. And here's the interesting part. If Total War Warhammer only had medieval unit types, siege battles would actually work surprisingly well, as they did in Warhammer 2 for missile-heavy factions like Dwarves, High Elves, or Skaven. Those factions could utilize defensive positions to fight off larger attacking forces again and again. But once other unit types enter the picture, everything changes. A medieval fortress assumes three things. First, the attacker has to come through the walls or climb over them. Second, once the battle enters the city, mobility disappears and it turns into choke points bloodbath. And third, the fortress itself can provide cover from missiles. But Warhammer breaks all three assumptions. While walls can stop infinite number of cavalry and huge number of enemy infantry, they do nothing against flying units. They can simply ignore the walls, the main defensive structure the entire battle is built around. Take a dragon. The entire point of building a fortress is to force the attacker through a predictable route, but a dragon doesn't care about gates, walls, or choke points. It simply flies over everything and lands directly on top of your artillery or missile units. At that point, the battle is no longer about defending a fortress, and it's about dealing with a flying monster inside your own city. But even if they do not fly, massive monsters propose different problem, as they do not behave like regular infantry. And while infantry or even cavalry will get bogged down in choke points, monsters will simply push through defensive formations due to their high mass. Instead of getting trapped in wall of spears, they can reach the back line or capture points almost immediately, and do whatever they want once inside the city. Not to mention that in Warhammer 3, a lot of units got wall breaker trait, allowing them to break down the walls and even further make them obsolete. Fast single entities, like heroes or lords on mounts, create another problem. They have the mobility of cavalry without suffering from cavalry's biggest weakness inside cities, getting stuck in tight corridors. So single entities and monsters regain mobility inside cities way better than units in formations. Heroes on mounts can freely dance around defenders inside the city. They can move from capture point to capture point, destroy defensive structures, and even win siege battles without ever fighting. However, not all siege problems are siege-related. Single-entity heroes and lords are among strongest unit types in game for many reasons, but in sieges, their strengths are even more noticeable. Fortresses also provide almost no protection against magic. Most of the spells can be freely casted inside cities to nuke the defenders. The defenders are also often forced into tight formations because of choke points, making them even better targets for damaging spells. And finally, missile armies and artillery. Historically, the development of gunpowder slowly made traditional stone fortifications obsolete. The same thing happens in Warhammer. Walls provide some protection against small missile fire, like arrows, or basic artillery, like bolt throwers or catapults. But they do almost nothing against powerful artillery like dreadquake mortars, or other long-range siege weapons. So once these units enter the picture, the fortress stops doing the one thing it was designed to do: remove the attacker's advantages. And when those three assumptions disappear, the fortress stops functioning as it's supposed to do. Players were asking for siege rework for years, and it finally came with the release of Warhammer 3. However, the Warhammer 3 siege rework tried to improve upon the old system of medieval fortress. Even it failed in so many ways, the ideas were logical. Dockable areas, with all their line-of-sight issues, made defenders on the wall slightly more resistant to missile fire. Additional towers and capture points inside the cities helped melee factions defend and attack settlements more effectively. Back in Warhammer 2, factions like Greenskins or Warriors of Chaos had almost no chance to defend cities when outnumbered, unlike missile-heavy factions. However, this was a lazy bandage solution to a bigger problem. Multiple entrances and larger city maps were meant to create more tactical gameplay. Instead, larger maps only made defending harder. More capture points further forced defenders to split across the map, and more entrances reduced the value of choke points even more. But even if we ignore all the AI and pathing issues, and they get completely fixed, the core problems remain. None of those changes address the units that actually break siege battles. The new rework is on the way, and by now few changes are announced. The most impactful one is that pocket ladders will be removed, and that's a good thing. Infantry will no longer be able to climb every wall instantly, so the attackers will now have to build the ladders and focus on just a handful of points on the walls to try to enter. This will slightly negate a problem that was introduced with larger maps and allow the defenders to hold off advancing enemies on just a few spots. Once again, smaller fighting force will be able to hold off larger enemy numbers at those entrance points. Gates will also become more durable, and this, however, will change almost nothing. The attackers will still need to bash down just a single gate to plow through. It will take longer, and that's it. But notice something. Every single one of those improvements targets same problems. And once again, infantry will take the heavy hit. The changes don't affect flying units. Flyers will still be able to completely ignore walls and choke points, and you can only hold them off by missile fire, which is exactly as it is right now. They also don't really affect monsters or heroes. They will take longer to break down the gates, but once the doors are down, everything will be the same. These units will still push through the defenders and start wreaking havoc inside the cities. There is also zero impact on how the spells work. Wizards will still be able to cast where and however they want, and the defenders can still do nothing about it. Missile-heavy armies are also barely affected. Just like with monsters, it might take them longer to destroy towers and walls, but the battle tactics they use will remain the same. So while mass infantry assaults will become harder to pull off, the strongest siege armies remain almost exactly the same. So this is exactly the reason why Siege reworks will keep disappointing players. Creative Assembly keeps improving the fortress, but Warhammer stopped being a game about medieval fortresses the moment dragons, giants, flying monsters, devastating magic, and powerful artillery became the center of its battles. At the moment, we have armies that are closer to 40k, or at least modern-day warfare, trying to fight in medieval type of environment, the fortress. But until siege battles are designed around these units, instead of medieval warfare, every rework will improve individual mechanics without solving the core problem. And it's not like melee infantry is so strong that it needs even more obstacles in siege battles. It already struggles in Warhammer 3, and you can learn exactly why in this video. See ya.